The right support is crucial, as you know, to having an empowered birth, as pillar number 5 of my 5 pillars. And as you know from my book, Your Empowered Birth, when you have your partner on board, that's when the magic happens. Part of the empowered birth method, as you know, is that you need to get past your fears. Your partner then needs to get past theirs in order for them to be a strong advocate for you. And today, I'm going to be talking with a special guest on how to get that strong advocate out of your partner. Because, most of the time, if your partner's just taking a class or they're just trying to read the books, they can't make sense of things. And if you don't get them on board, they are the wild card. So today I have a very special guest, Cynthia Gabriel, author of Natural Hospital Birth. This book is amazing, by the way. I have so many post-it notes, as you can see. But chapter 4 of her book is about the right support. And Cynthia, thank you so much for agreeing to this interview. I'm really happy to have you here. And for anyone who doesn't know Cynthia, she is an amazing doula. She is also a childbirth educator, and she has a background in anthropology, which is absolutely fascinating. So, Cynthia, welcome, and please tell us how you got started.
Thank you. Yeah, it's always fun to talk about birth and support teams. So I'm grateful for the opportunity. Yeah, I got into birth a long time ago. I've been doing it for a while, since 1998, when I took my first doula training in California. And I took that doula training because I was doing anthropology graduate work, and I was going to Russia for a year to work on a dissertation about birth and families at that time. And things have changed in Russia as they have in the US. I learned a lot from that year that I spent in Russia. I followed a home birth midwife for a year, and I worked in a Russian birth hospital for a while. And I worked there as a midwifery apprentice. So that was my official role at the Russian birth center. So I got to be very hands-on and very involved in a lot of birth there. And in many ways, it was where I learned birth. So I saw a few births in the US before I went to Russia, but in Russia, I saw birth after birth after birth. And so that really shaped my understanding of birth, because at that time in Russia, everybody would give, 99%, even more, even higher than that, gave birth in hospitals. Home birth was not a very common option, less common even than in the US. And virtually everybody gave birth vaginally without pain medication, and expected to do so, and felt competent to do so. So one of the driving forces in my research, and just I think it's just so fascinating, is how confident Russian folks were that their bodies could do it. So obviously, sometimes people do need medical intervention, and that was accessible to them and easy to get a cesarean if they needed that. But attempting a vaginal birth was nobody was worried about it or afraid. So when I would ask people about birth, they would be like, "Of course I can do it. My mother did it. My grandmother did it. My great-grandmother did it. My great-great-grandmother did it." And that was just a very, very, very common answer to any question I had about, what do you think about this? Whereas in the United States, when I ask people about thinking about their kind of birth that they want or what they imagine, I I will say I think it's a slight majority that will prefer to give birth without drugs. There's certainly a strong contingent of Americans who would prefer to use medications, and that is fine. But for those that start off with kind of a like, either I don't want them or I'd really like to avoid them if I could, still their answers to questions about birth are very tentative, and they don't come in. They're like, well, if I can, and if everything works out, and if if it's not too long, and if so there's a lot of caveats to I would, instead of just kind of being able to say, what I would prefer is this is my ideal version. And of course, I will change if the baby needs something different, but this is what I really want. Or even that well, I can, if I can do it, I'll do it. uh, so I just found really different attitudes or assumptions that people bring with them into the birth space in Russia and the United States. And that set me on this path of just trying to explain why that is, like why we have a culture that makes it so difficult and a lot of fear surrounding it and a lot of what ifs instead of just straight up confidence. I have a lot of ideas about what we do, all because it's not just what happens to us when we're pregnant that brings that fear in. It's what happens to us all of our lives growing up, and what happens to Russians all their lives growing up that changes the dynamic quite a bit.
Yeah, and I agree with that so much because even when I was reading your book, I'm sitting there, I'm like, she totally gets this. And even with mine, when I was talking about it, it's like it's so much culturally ingrained, that idea that you can't give birth
Hmm.
without medical intervention.
Hmm.
Whereas with your book, you're speaking more about the physiological birth side, which I call the true natural birth, because even natural birth itself has been appropriated by our culture. And so many people are like, oh, I want a natural birth. And then they get into that system, which your book helps address. And it's like, well, what do I do?
Hmm.
However, also physiologically, we have to be able to just surrender to our own process,
Hmm.
which is where we need to have that support. Because if the medical system has only ever seen pathologized births
Hmm.
and they don't trust natural birth, which is what's the cultural normative here, unlike in Russia, where everybody just assumes you're going to birth, well, then you're kind of stuck because there's that fear on both sides. And I
Hmm.
mean, I talk about this all the time on my channel. So if you are watching and you're like, well, where are the other videos? You just go to my YouTube channel playlist and you will be able to find Getting Past Fear. This is really important. This is one of the key components. And Cynthia, we talk about this too in her book. She's got that as you've got to get past your fear and believe, like these Russian ladies, that you can do this. But of course, if your grandmother and your great grandmother and your mother and your aunt and your sisters all had C-sections, I don't
Hmm.
blame you. I don't
Hmm.
blame you for being scared. And that is where you get past your fear and bring in the right support of your partner because your partner has their own stories. And Cynthia, can you speak to that, please?
Sure. Yes. I mean, I do think that everybody brings their own background with them into this experience. And so if you have the person who's pregnant is bringing all of their experiences and their fear triggers with them, so one person, it could be a fear of needles, and all you have to do is like show them a needle and they're gonna, start having heart palpitations and like getting like their fear hormones are going to go way up, and another person sees the same needle and like nothing at all happens to them. So we're all very individual in our reactions to specific things that could affect like whether we're feeling afraid or our fear hormones like are going to overtake the lovey-dovey hormones that we really need to get birth going well. And the same is true for our partners. So our partners also bring their entire lives history of what's happened to them and what they have phobias about or fears about or traumas from the past, sometimes unknown traumas that you don't even know what your trigger is until it happens. So that can happen to people. And so what's I think terrible is when you have two people who have very opposite needs in order to feel safe, trying to navigate the same space together. And that can also be true with the hospital staff. So you have a nurse or you have a provider, and for what they need in order to be feeling safe could be quite different than what the birthing person or their partner needs to feel safe. So just kind of acknowledging that this is what that all of these hormones and all of these personal histories are always in the room. So if you ignore them, you're virtually working against, you're letting them work against you. By acknowledging that this is true, then you can become more conscious about how you're going to manage all of this and what you can do ahead of time. And you can't do everything ahead of time. I actually try to naturalize or normalize that there's a normal level of fear of giving birth. This is something you've never done before, often if it's your first baby. So just like running a marathon, I remember I was like 20 years old and I was going to run a 3-mile race the next day. And I could hardly sleep the night before. I was so nervous about what it was going to be like. And I think it's a very good analogy because as soon as I was actually running, like those feelings actually changed in quality and uh, it was the anticipation fear that was large, and then as soon as I was in it, like that the anticipation was gone and I was realizing like I'm focusing on what my body's doing. And for a lot of people, I think that anticipation fear is absolutely normal and not some, and so there's fears to work on and there's fears to accept as perfectly normal and to kind of live with and embrace and see them as a like, yeah, I'm supposed to be a little jittery. Like sometimes fear I've heard fear called it's excitement without the breath. So
Yes.
there's a difference between kind of terror and I'm potentially going to be triggered into like really a negative space and fear of like not knowing what I can do, not knowing what my body can do, like that. I think that's perfectly normal. But some of these fears, and I like to first start off by saying that this hormone cycle, the reason that fear matters is because of the oxytocin that we want to be flowing. You literally cannot have a vaginal birth if your body is not producing or flooded with tons of oxytocin. So the oxytocin is going to make the uterus contract. The uterus must contract in order to open and eventually push the baby out. So without this hormone, without high levels of it and more receptors than you've ever made in your life, you can't have a vaginal birth. So we should be doing everything we can to facilitate the birthing person producing oxytocin. And when we think about the only other time in our life we have such a huge amount of oxytocin in our bodies is when we're engaged in like sexual encounters or sexual attraction, to a lesser degree, but we can usually identify it. Things like petting our dog or watching the cute Hallmark commercial. You can get like that little burst of oxytocin, or just across the room when you see your partner and they look at you, like you can get um, a little burst. And so we get these little bursts, but really the best analogy for how to promote oxytocin production is the same as sex. And so all of the things that we do to promote oxytocin production in sex, like work and birth, like most of us prefer a darker place and we prefer something cozy and we want the doors closed and we want it to be safe and we don't want to feel like somebody can walk in on us at any moment. And we like to feel like the person who's around us cares about us. And the things that take us out of oxytocin production are thinking about our to-do list and, oh my God, I got to get this done by 6 p.m. And tomorrow I got to get the kids to school. So any of those logical planning thoughts. And so you can see right away, like if somebody came to you while you're trying to have sex with your partner and asked, would you prefer an injection or a pill? Like it just, even just a simple question requiring you to do thoughts is not conducive to oxytocin production. But really what cuts down oxytocin production are the fear hormones. So oxytocin is going to it's going to slow down or even stop if we get a big surge of adrenaline or the catecholamines that come when we are like, wait a minute, something is unsafe in my environment. So I encourage the birthing person and their partner to have some really deep conversations about what could potentially make them feel unsafe in that birth space. One thing they have control over is who comes with them. I really encourage people to think through who they're inviting to the birth, because usually both the birthing person and the partner know right away who the people are who make your backs go up or make you feel like I gotta fight to get the thing I want, versus like, oh yeah, they just come in and like rub my hair and like do what I need.
Like the
They're
high-strung mother-in-law.
Yeah, exactly. Like
Yeah.
usually people are very aware of like which one does what. And if they had a wedding, not everybody does before they have a baby, but some people do. And when you have had that experience, usually the wedding is a great place to know who made you feel like calm and supported and who had their own agenda.
Hmm.
Reflecting on that can be helpful. And so like there's the other people that you're inviting into the space, and then there's the, you know, okay, like I would feel the most safe if, really if one person says I would feel the most safe if it was just a dark room and I was all by myself, like that would be my ideal birth space. And then their partner is like, oh my God, I would only feel safe if I had like five doctors in the room and I was hooked up to every tube and I was being monitored and I knew that they had all of my numbers there and I was not going into a bad space anywhere. My blood pressure was good. And those are two really different versions of feeling safe.
Yeah.
And so, what I think birthing people don't often appreciate is that because of those hormones of labor, they're going to be in an altered brainwave state. They're in an incredibly suggestible state. There's the whole hypnobirthing movement, and I think you don't need to take a special class to get a hypnobirth. I think when you're in active labor, you just are in a hypnotic state. You're in that brainwave state, so you're very suggestible. So a lot of people think like, oh, they can just like say what they want in the moment, but really, most people are very dependent on their partner being able to say things on their behalf and to be able to intervene on their behalf because they're busy laboring. And it's actually bad for their labor to come out of it, to make those words and answer those questions and make those decisions. So getting a partner to understand that it kind of doesn't matter if you feel safe because you don't have to produce the hormones to get this baby out. So your job is to figure out what makes this person feel safe. And your job is to do that. And if it's exactly the opposite of what you need, you probably need to do a lot of work prenatally to be able to express how difficult that would be. And for the birthing person to hear and appreciate and validate that all of their fears and are okay to have, and they're not wrong. It's just that they're not the one giving birth.
Hmm.
So I think it's a lot of, therapy works, therapy helps. It's hard to say in regular life, we're equals, and how you feel and how I feel are equally valid. And we have to find something that works for both of us. And then to all of a sudden be in a space where what you feel actually does not really matter. What this person feels like matters 100%. And what you feel like you can leave the room and the baby might still come.
Mhm.
But ideally, you're able to stay in the room and support this person so that their hormones can work the best. And that love and support, like being able to do that, to go past yourself to support the person, is actually not only helps them because you're not bringing something bad into the space. Now they feel loved and supported, which also magnifies the oxytocin. So that connection to a partner is actually one of the best sources of this oxytocin in labor. And certainly in early labor, being alone and walking around or snuggling or kissing or just being with your partner, if you do have that good connection, really helps early labor.
Yeah. Yeah. And I mean, everything that you're saying, Cynthia, it's just like there's so much to unpack here. And I really wish we had more time to be able to do that. At the same time, like this is something that I've noticed as well. And it really comes down to the love languages.
Mm-hmm.
It's like his love language is different from your love language, but right now, your love language is the most important one.
Mm-hmm.
And he needs to be focused 100% on your love language.
Mm-hmm.
So the thing is, though, that often we don't tell people what our love language is.
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes we don't even know ourselves. And a lot of
Mm-hmm.
what I do with my clients is getting them to figure out, and I watch the dynamic of these couples to be like, okay, what's his love language right now? Where am I seeing him feeling kind of contracted, kind of being like, oh, that was harsh for her to say that. Oh, I feel
Mhm.
kind of guilty about that from the past of the trauma that I unknowingly put on her by trying to protect her, but I failed. And there's so many aspects to this
Mhm.
in the dance between you and your partner. And I
Mhm.
actually have a friend and mentor, Annie Lala. She's amazing relationship coach, and she also does conflict with a lot of people that are deeply in love.
Mhm.
So anybody watching, if you want to check her out, you can as well. Like, just email me if you can't find the exact name. But the way that it comes down to it is like you've got to be able to communicate with your partner. And to be able to do that, you have to feel safe saying anything to them. And
Mhm.
they have to be able to hold that space for you. And I mean, Cynthia, like you mentioned when we were just talking off the record about how your birth classes are a little bit different
Mhm.
because you're focused more on the partner than you are
Mhm.
on the actual person who's going to be giving birth. Can you speak to that?
Sure. I mean, my assumption when families come into my childbirth ed classes is that probably the person who's pregnant did the research and found the classes and decided which one to take and signed them up. And then sometimes they will even be like, okay, like my partner has to work on, two of the 6 nights or things like that. So it's a very pregnant person focused culture that we live in for knowledge about birth, but I try to set it up like right away that the class is really aimed at the partner. And so usually, and I will say, like, so if you're pregnant, you should put away all of your, computers, phones, and writing utensils and paper. And if you're the partner, you need all of that out. You are the one taking the notes because in labor, I hope this person is going to forget everything that we said here for 6 weeks. I want them to just be in their body, in their mind, like just experiencing what's happening and experimenting with this contraction. I tried holding my breath and it didn't feel good. So the next one, I'm going to try breathing. And like they're just experimenting with what I tried lying down for this contraction and it didn't feel so good. So next one, I'm going to get up or I think it's time to get in the tub now. Whatever those kind of thoughts, that's what I want those thoughts to be in the birthing person's head. Whereas the partner, they get a long list from me of, first of all, things to bring to the birth, because that's the other thing is that the pregnant person packs the labor bag and then they're in labor and we need the chapstick and they're trying to tell the partner where to find the chapstick during a contraction, or hooked up to a machine where they can't get to the bag. So it's like, really the partner needs to pack the labor supplies so that they know where they are. And really important, like chapstick is a great example. I always tell them to bring gum for their own breath, if their breath gets bad, if it's a long birth, especially. But also, if the birthing person vomits, like they can just chew gum and spit it out. So gum, they need to know where like hair ties are. They need to know where like comb and toothbrush for the birthing person is. So like they really, and all the labor tools, like all the, if we're going to have like tennis balls to press on the back or things like that, the partner needs to know where those are. I also give them a list. These are the questions that at every shift change, they're going to come in and ask you again. Are you allergic to medication? When was your last menstrual period? Like all of those questions the partner needs to be able to answer them. So, take a minute and give them all the answers or your partner all of the answers to these questions so they can just write them down and then they can answer them when the new person comes on shift. And when the medical staff come in and they're offering interventions, we can have some canned responses to how you're going to manage that. But usually it's the partner that needs to speak up and say things like, thank you for this information. Could you give us 5 minutes to just talk to each other about this before we give you an answer? And I'm hopeful that the birthing person is just laboring through that conversation and is not the one who says we need 5 minutes, but that the partner can articulate that, okay, thank you for this information. Can you give us a few minutes to talk to each other? Which to me is the canned response to every intervention that is not an obvious emergency. You always need 5 minutes to talk about it with each other before you make a decision. And also, if you ask for 5 minutes, usually you'll get like 15 or 20. So it's a way to put things off too. And there's other canned responses that partners can learn to use, and then they can practice in the birthing class. And we push at them, we give them scenarios, but it's the partner who needs to learn all of it.
Yeah. Yeah.
Oh,
I agree
also,
with
it's the
all of this.
partner who's going to know when it's time to go to the hospital, with one caveat. Like a birthing person sometimes has an intuitive sense, like like their eyes just like open and they're like, let's go, or it's time to go. And when the birthing person in labor says it's time to go, I believe them. But more often people are confused, like, where am I in early labor? And they kind of wish that they hope that they're like 9, but really they're 3 centimeters. And so at home, usually it's the partner who's going to more accurately be able to say, oh, these are the signs of active labor. Like this, we've crossed this threshold and you're looking like you're in active labor. And so now, like, I'm going to start thinking more about like moving toward the hospital if you're planning the hospital birth. But I think the partners are not expecting that that's their call. And
No.
they feel very underprepared to make that call, but they can learn.
Hmm. Yeah. I mean, even my former partner, I was an advocate by the point that I was going in and having my second child. And I was like, I'm having a home birth. Like, there's just no way I'm going back in the hospital after what I'd experienced. It's like, it's just not for me. I don't like needles.
Mhm.
So being in that space was very stressful. I was able to do it, but everything you were talking about the stress and people interrupting, and my partner had no clue. He had
Mhm.
no idea when people were asking the questions, I was the one who was being interrupted. And
Mhm.
when he went to go off to the bathroom down the hall, probably not a good idea. That's when they pulled me out of the tub and put me on the bed. And he's
Mhm.
like, I don't know what to do. I'm walking in. Where do you want her? And he started following their directions,
Mhm.
which you don't want your partner to do. You
Mhm.
want them to be trained up. And I love that you have given the partners the job of packing the bag because, yeah, they don't know where anything is. I
Mhm.
could just picture that. It's like if I had actually needed anything out of the bag, yeah, my partner would have been completely clueless.
Mhm.
And he had no idea what to say because all I
Mhm.
had said was, here's my birth plan, make sure they follow this.
Mhm.
And we'd taken the classes and we did all those position changes and everything.
Mhm.
But yeah, I had to do the thinking.
Yeah,
And it was
exactly.
really,
And
really
some of
hard to
some of
have to
the
do the thinking.
some of the tiny things that help a labor be successful physiologically are things like remembering to turn the lights out, which the birthing person cannot do. Like, they cannot remember, they can't notice the lights are on. It's affecting them, but they can't notice it. They can't move over there easily and like turn on, especially if they found a good position for contractions. They don't want to get out of it to like go over there and turn the light off. So like and another thing that really helps a physiologic labor is staying hydrated. And so the partner has to practice. Who's going to remember to turn the light off every time somebody leaves the room? Because the staff come in, they turn the light on and they leave it on. So the partner has to practice. Every time this light is on, you turn it off, 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 off. And then here's the drink with the bendy straw. I mean, a lot of hospitals will give it to you with a bendy straw, or you can bring your own. But let's practice like 5 contractions, and like in between every, and I want the person to move so they're in a new place for every contraction, and you have to bring the water with you so that you can put it to their lips, like in between every contraction. And if you think about you're going to do it every contraction, you'll succeed like every other. And then they're getting a sip of water every like 10 minutes. So it's great. But if you don't practice it, then the birthing person writes down, stay hydrated. And the partner never thinks of this as their responsibility.
Hmm. Cynthia, I really wish I had been able to go to your classes instead of the ones that I took my partner to. But like, this is just amazing. What you've really done is you've got it so ingrained in them. And I mean, men especially, they need direction. This
Hmm.
is the difference in the brains of men and women. It's like we are very much the multitaskers. Men don't have that capacity. In fact, a lot of their productivity is to say, stop multitasking. But for us, it's different because we're the ones that are also biologically carrying a baby. We have to tune into the baby and in our own needs and the needs of our families. So we are multitaskers, which is not so good in labor.
Hmm.
Because if you're trying to remember what else you need to pack
Hmm.
while you're in labor, did I
Hmm.
forget anything in that bag last minute? How nice would it be if you are already in your flow and your partner's like, don't worry, I got this. I
Hmm.
got this.
Hmm.
Just focus. Let your
Hmm.
monkey do it.
Hmm. Hmm.
Like, just, and
Yep.
yeah, it's incredible. And I see this with my clients too, where my client gets in her flow. And one of my first clients, she was having a home birth after two previous C-sections.
Hmm.
And there got to be a point where I just watched this dad. He could see her shift a certain way. It was very, very subtle. And he's like, oh, she's having another one. I'm going to squeeze the hips. Okay, ease off. Oh, she's licking her lips. Bring her the drink. Oh, he was just so in tune. He knew exactly what to do. And it was very routine, like how you just described.
Hmm.
So, I
Hmm.
mean, Cynthia, we could talk all day about this, and I know we've got to wrap this up, but you've talked about one particular component in your chapter and what you teach in your classes, but there's so much more in that book. And I'm only on chapter 5. I'm really getting into the nitty-gritty because there's just so much to unpack. Can you kind of tell anybody who hasn't read your book what some of the most key important pieces are that make you unique from 99% of the other birth books out there for natural birth?
Sure. Like one thing I think is really important, and I'm not, there are some great books out there, and I do think that different books speak to different people. So there are a lot of books out there. I think mine is very logical and factual, and I'm an academic, and I like that kind of language. Part of my goal is to try to mainstream this physiologic birth, make it accessible to, because I think some of the stereotypes are that people who want this unmedicated birth, like they want a home birth, which is great if that is what you want. Absolutely. But it's a stereotype, and that you want a home birth, that you are a hippie, that you go barefoot everywhere, and not that like you're a lawyer who, meets your deadlines every day and works like 80-hour weeks. And and I think either one of those people should have access to what they need to have a physiologic birth. Like just because, but I don't think the lawyer is going to read the books that like talk about birth in a particular language. So I was trying to like mainstream it and like make it accessible to a wider variety of people. We already had some great books that were speaking to a certain population that I love. I love reading them. So I think it has mainstream language in it in terms of like more factual or logical sounding. And I think that I try to give you like literally the phrases or words that work with the staff. So I'm because I care so much about the oxytocin production, I never want someone to make an enemy of the hospital staff. So I never want them to go to a class or read a book and then come in arguing. So
Mm-hmm.
the argumentation is going to pull up all the negative hormones. So I'm trying to give people the phrases that help you build the team, but also get you what you want. So
Yes.
mhm,
It's very much like my phrase and like my tagline on my book is how to get the birth you want without having to fight, beg, or compromise. Because
yeah,
if you're fighting an uphill battle, you're putting cortisol and adrenaline
exactly.
into your system.
Exactly.
You're activating their fight or flight.
Hmm.
Depending on the type of person that they are and their own response to your pushback, that can go very, very badly for you,
Exactly.
or it can just kind of cause a disconnect.
Yeah.
Whereas if you're compromising, you're not getting exactly what you want. And as Cynthia, you already said, It's mom who needs the birthing person who needs to be 100% doing what they need for feeling safe. The
Hmm.
hospital staff need to accommodate that, and you need to be able to have the words and the phrases. You did a great job, by the way. I was looking at those. I've got post-it notes all through them. I'm like, this is something I'm going to quote Cynthia on, this one here. You have nailed it in terms of how to advocate. And just the phrases that you have, the questions that you ask, yes, they're very well thought out. And as a professional woman myself, who used to be very anti-hippie, I'm not a hippie, but I want a home birth.
Hmm.
This book spoke to me, and it would have spoken to me even back then before I got
Hmm.
into more of, I mean, I sometimes go barefoot on the beach. Come on.
Yeah,
It's
exactly.
nice.
Right. It's like, how do you unlock like all of these aspects of a person's, so different books will unlock different things for people. So different
Yes.
language.
Yes.
Yeah.
And I'm just going to speak to one thing because there's beautiful imagery that Cynthia puts in the ideal birth vision. And it actually went beyond what I do with my clients. And it had me thinking, ooh, because she was talking about this beautiful vision someone had about walking and laboring on the beach. And then the scene shifted and being on a mountaintop. And I was just thinking to myself, like, yeah, being on the beach, laboring, and maybe having like a little cabin or something, a little beach house, and being able to hear the ocean, it really opened up the possibilities for my next birth. And I just wanted to thank you for that
Mhm.
because that imagery, the way you write it, I'm going to caveat this like anybody who's thinking, oh, this book is another academic book that's going to be hard and dry to read. No, Cynthia's book is very conversational. It's very easy to get through. I was very impressed when I was sitting there on the beach reading it because that's where I
Yeah,
was.
I think it's a relatively fast
Yeah,
read. Yeah. Hmm.
it is. It's a very fast read, and it's just that I love to unpack things. So I'm sitting there and I'm reading it, and I'm like, okay, I've got to pause, even though I want to keep going and write something down so I don't lose this page because I want to be able to present that back. And also, like you could probably sit here for an afternoon reading this book and it's just it keeps getting better. Cynthia shares stories. And I mean, is there anything like if there's one chapter that you would want someone to read out of your book, if they were like, I only have
Yeah,
time for one chapter,
yeah.
what is it?
And I recommend this no matter what kind of birth a person is planning. This chapter on what labor feels like, I think is really helpful. And I think people have so much fear of what it can be like that when they read what people really, how they really describe it and what the kind of like the ranges of what, like this kind of, maybe 5% of people describe it like this, but 80% describe it like this. And it's a lot easier to kind of see what labor is like. And I think when people read that chapter, they calm down. Even if they're planning an epidural in the hospital or a home birth, like I think that like what labor feels like is helpful to all of them.
And that's in the second half of your book, which I haven't gotten to
Yes,
yet.
I think it's at because I do the whole birth planning process first, and then that one is kind of in the middle. But I
Yeah,
often recommend that people start there.
really.
Well,
Yeah,
it depends
because
on how, like if they're already, 30 weeks pregnant, maybe maybe starting with what labor feels like is a good place to start and then kind of go backward to what do you want, what do you vision for your own birth, because they're pretty far along, they've been talking to doctors a lot, so sometimes that chapter just like calms down a lot of fears.
yeah, I would agree with that, especially if you're like at the end and you're starting to already freak out about labor because you've been sort of absorbing what I call the natural birth trap culture that we're in and the
Mhm.
culture of fear, then you want to get out of that fear trap, then check out that chapter. I'm just going to quickly look to see what chapter that is. I don't expect you to remember every
It
single
might be
chapter of
7.
your book.
I think it's 7.
Um, You've got early labor at home is chapter 7, and then you have
Okay,
a variation of early labor, which is
I think it's
chapter
before
8.
that, so
Yeah,
it's
it's part 2 is
okay.
basically all about giving birth, and it's 6 to 14. So you've got a
Yeah,
whole
there's
section.
one chapter that's definitely called like what labor feels like, and it's brief. It's
There's
probably like 8 pages or something like that. It has some charts in
what
it.
labor feels like is chapter 6.
Okay,
Yeah.
chapter 6. Yep.
But
So
I
even
just
if
love
like,
that you have chapters for every stage and variation. Like I'm excited to dive into this part, and I've given birth, I've helped moms give birth, but you know me, I'm a birth junkie. I love this
yeah,
stuff.
I also, yeah, I love reading more books. Yep.
Well, Cynthia, thank you so much for joining us.
Yeah.
And I just wanted to make sure that anybody who wants to work with you or check out your classes can reach out to you. Because one of the things about being in the empowered birth circle and empowered mom circle is that I want to make sure that everybody knows and amplify your voice so that you get to be able to help them. Because if we don't know that somebody exists and we don't know a book exists, we're stuck with the mainstream,
Mhm.
the same status quo. You go into the mom groups and you ask the questions like, well,
Mhm.
what books to read?
Yeah,
Oftentimes I'm the one who's having to say, hey, check this one out.
absolutely.
And not everybody sees that.
Yep.
So
The due date groups
if,
can be the worst.
oh, I have a whole video that I'm going to be doing on it's like stay away from the due dates. I
Yeah.
actually have a 26 things you need to know if this is your first time planning a true natural
Mhm.
birth. I actually dropped that video back on just on Wednesday. As of recording this is actually October 4th. And the video that I mentioned was actually dropped on the 2nd. So if you haven't seen it, go check this out because it also talks about what you need to know about planning a hospital birth, which again, if you want to know more, I actually even mentioned Cynthia and I mentioned natural hospital birthing in various videos. And then I'm going deep into each one of these and stay away from due date groups because they're just going to perpetuate the fear and you don't have any frame of what happened before
Mhm.
or what happens after. Like everybody's in the same bubble
Yep.
and it's usually mostly first time moms.
Mhm.
So, yeah, no, I am right with you there. But if somebody was, do you do anything online or is it just in person classes?
I do private classes online, but I don't do group. I don't have a group class online.
Okay, but you do
People
private
can reach,
classes.
yeah, people can reach me on Instagram. I'm the Birth Muse. So like with THE, the Birth Muse. On Facebook, it's Natural Hospital Birth. And my email, which is an easy way, probably the best and easiest way to find me, is motherearthbirth@yahoo.com. And I'm like old school. I've used it so long, I can't get rid of my Yahoo account. So it's motherearthbirth@yahoo.com.
I love that. It even rhymes. Like
Uh-huh.
that is a very perfect email. Well,
Hmm.
Cynthia, thank you so much. So
Hmm.
again, if you want to connect with Cynthia, the best way is motherearthbirth@yahoo.com. So
Hmm.
that's nice and easy to remember.
Yep.
And then it was for your Instagram, it was
The Birth Muse.
the Birth Muse and the Natural Hospital Birth on Facebook.
Yep.
And do you have a website or anything for people who want to look for your classes,
My
or is it
web's
just
not
email?
not now. I have had in the past and it's not working, so not right now.
Ah, technology. Hey,
Hmm.
I mean, these all always evolve, and who knows, maybe in the future, if somebody's watching this in like a couple of years from now and you do have that stuff, but yeah, just reach out to Cynthia. And if you can't get a hold of her, you can always reach out to me too, because Cynthia and I are in connection now and we're going to be talking. So
Hmm.
thank you, Cynthia.
Yeah,
Thank you
thank
so
you.
much for coming on. And thank you, viewer. I love you so much for sitting and watching to the end. I know we go kind of long with these interviews. And the reason I do that, of course, is because you can't get everything in a 20-second clip or even a 10-minute video. And I am committed to you having an empowered natural birth or even just an empowered birth if you feel that you need more medical intervention. And Cynthia believes the same philosophy. It's all through her book. Again, Natural Hospital Birth. You can get it on Amazon. It's also available on Kindle if you don't really want a physical copy. I'm kind of
And
old
Audible. You can do,
school.
yeah, you can do an the what do you like a audiobook.
Yeah, I have the Kindle. I don't
Hmm.
have the audiobook because things go in one ear and out the other
Hmm.
on me. But
Hmm.
I love the physical copy because I'm a little bit of a birth nerd. And I love to just be able to hold a book in my hand, take it to the beach. But yeah, so there's three different ways that you can get this book. If you're an auditory learner or you just prefer podcast and audio, then it's available for you. I'm telling you, if you are looking for a book to help you plan your true natural hospital birth, take what I already teach in the empowered birth method and then enhance it with the right education. And I can fully say that Cynthia's book, Natural Hospital Birth, is the right education. And if you want private classes, you know where to reach her because training up your partner, I would want to take these classes. And I just might in the future just be like, hey, I'm bringing my partner in. I mean, I already know this stuff, but I'd like you to teach it because then it
Hmm.
just also reinforces what I'm teaching them.
Hmm.
So thank you, Cynthia. This has been
Yeah,
amazing. We're going to
thank
have
you.
you on again in the future. And yeah, this has been wonderful.
Thank you.
This has been the Empowered Birth interview series, which we do every Friday. Make sure that you are liking, sharing, following, subscribing to our channel. If you are taking the do it yourself path, be sure to pay it forward because I am committed to you having an empowered birth, whether you work with me or not, whether you work with anyone in the empowered birth circle or not. And as long as we get this out into the mainstream, we can change the face of birth to be more mother centered and to have the accessibility for the resources that we truly deserve to have within our natural birth, get our partners on board, train up the medical staff, and then there won't be as much pushback anymore. There won't be that culture of fear. And we'll be able to do what the Russian ladies are doing, as Cynthia said, it's like, my grandmother gave birth, my mother gave birth, I can do it. Wouldn't that be wonderful? All right. I love you. Happy empowered birth journey. And I'll see you next time. Bye now.